Dancing with the Stars, as is John Dempsey. Nancy is dancing for the Brookline Senior Center. John Dempsey is dancing for the Sister City Project. Support them both, please.
Welcome to our very own Brookline Sister City celebration tonight. Is this good times? Yes? Delicious food? Fun? Thank you, Lisa and Vine. So we're going to get started because we have such a full and fun and informative schedule, okay? I'm Christine Suckett and I will be happy to help you your host tonight. So first, amongst all the many thank yous, I think we need to thank our Brookline Sister City President, Richard Segan, right here behind me. He is the captain steering this ship, and I'm going to turn it over to him to say many other thank yous, because this is a real group effort.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you very much, all of you, for joining us here tonight. Wonderful day outside, 70 degrees, wonderful night, so thank you. We are an all-volunteer organization, the Sister City Project, and we have no staff, and because of that we have almost no overhead. When people travel to Quezalguaque, as 6 of us did this year, we travel at our own expense. So on the one hand, since we have no overhead, you could say it's very good, because almost all of the funds that we raise through your generosity and the generosity of others goes to our projects in our sister city, Quezalguaque. On the other hand, it's a challenge, and we don't have an infrastructure or staff to lean on. We are dependent solely on the generosity not only of money, but of time. And we have a fantastic board, we have a fantastic advisory committee, and we've also had a great 2015 celebration committee. So I want to thank them all for their contributions. I want to especially thank the 2015 celebration committee for putting on, this is only our 2nd year that we've done Brookline Sister City Week, and I think by all accounts it's a great success. So I want to recognize there are 5 people in particular that have put in a tremendous amount of time planning this effort. Our 2015 celebration committee chair has been Chobi Hoy. Chobi, are you here? Chobi has been a guiding force and a longtime supporter of the Sister City Project. Thank you, Chobi. Our former board president, Carol, is master. Carol is master of all things electronic, producing beautiful flyers, invitations, and many of the backroom functions that make our work possible. Peter Stringham has handled many of the logistics. Our MC tonight, of course, Chris, has managed and advised us regarding social media and promotion. And Lois Statlander, her grandson was outside directing traffic, so please be nice to those kids outside. They're doing this as volunteers. But Lois Statlander has helped out in many different things, including our first family event, which was held at the Brookline Coolidge Corner Branch Library this past Sunday, along with the help of Carol and Susan Morley, so thank you. We also thank Kathy Tallman and Beth Gilligan of the Coolidge Corner Theater Foundation for their making signs on screen this past Monday. You may have been there. They made it part of Sister City Week. And I don't know how many of you there, but you may have heard Dan Brooks. I thought he gave a really fantastic presentation, tying together Erin Brockovich and the chronic kidney disease epidemic that's affected Central America. Dan regressed that he couldn't be here tonight. Dan went back to Nicaragua on Tuesday. He was here on Monday, went back on Tuesday because he's working with MINSA and the national government to try to address the chronic kidney disease epidemic. Our work in partnership with Quezalguaque comes in many different forms. And rather than giving you a quick summary now of some of the things we've done recently, what I thought I'd do is just briefly introduce some of the players, and perhaps you can talk to them if you're interested in getting more involved. Talk to them and learn more about what the possibilities are. First, we have a very, very active medical committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Peter Stringham. You'll hear in a moment from some of the students, some of the medical and public health students that were in Quezalguaque this past summer. Carol, who's hiding upstairs, has been our liaison along with Maxine Shaw to the library that we built, or that we helped build, I should say, in Quezalguaque, and to the mobile library. And Carol, along with Miriam Haven, have been strong proponents of an arts program that we fund in Quezalguaque. And we recently funded or provided seed monies for the startup of a music program in Quezalguaque. This was not our idea, this was their request. Carol Pinheiro, are you here, Carol? Carol Pinheiro, who is going to be leading the Charler at 7 p.m. tonight, has been working on educational support and training, teacher training. And Carol traveled twice to Quezalguaque this past year, and she supervised the first undergraduate student placement that we had in Quezalguaque this past summer. So by the way, for those of you who are attending the Charlotte, it begins at 7 with Carol. Please feel free to, we might still be talking, I think we will given the hour. Please feel free to, the Charlotte will be in this room to my left. So, no, not upstairs, my left. So, who else are there? Got Stacy Downey. Stacy, I know you're here. Stacy Downey is our lead in terms of Brookline Schools interface. And I know all of you read the postings for the agendas for the Brookline School Committee. So you probably know already, but in case you don't know, there was a great agenda item on the school committee agenda this evening, and members of school committee members apologize for not being able to be here, but it was more important that they be on at the school committee meeting. And they voted, and I understand the vote has been made. The vote has been made. They voted to approve the first Brookline High School student-teacher trip to Quezalguaque. So not only do we have Stacy to thank for that, but Ben Call, who is a teacher at Brookline High School, a social studies teacher. He teaches global leadership. He traveled at his own expense. Where are you, Ben?
He went to the school committee.
He went to the school committee, okay. He was here earlier. Ben traveled at his own expense at the end of June to scope out the feasibility of a trip, and he really championed it along with Stacy to get this overcome this major hurdle. It's been a long time in coming. So thank you, Stacy, and our thanks to Ben. And I should say that the Sister City Board has already voted funds for student scholarships for this trip. So finances should not be a barrier for any student who applies and accepted into the program. I want to thank Kitty and Governor Michael Dukakis for joining us this evening. You'll hear from the governor in a few minutes. John Dempsey is here somewhere. John, former principal at Devotion, is going to be dancing. We met one of your competitive dancers, John, but it was all in good fun. Don is dancing for the Sister City Project on November 7th at the Brookline Rotary Dancing with the Stars. So thank you, John, and we hope that you will join us on November 7th. If you're dining out this week, consider dining at one of the 6 participating restaurants. The list of the restaurants on our website and in a flyer that's on the table at the registration table. And finally, before I turn it back to Joyce, who's going to introduce our next speaker, I want to, I hope you'll all stay for the public forum that begins at 7:30 with Stephen Kinzer. Many of us on the board have read Stephen Kinzer's book, Blood of Brothers. And I think it's a fascinating account of events in Nicaragua that was reported at some risk to himself. So we thank Stephen, it's really an honor. We thank you very much for being here tonight. And finally, to all of our contributors and sponsors, I just want to say thank you again, thank you very much.
You forgot one thing, coffee.
I forgot Recreo Coffee. There was a donation of Recreo Coffee. The coffee that you drink later this evening is donated by Recreo, and they are selling some 1-pound bags of coffee after the show.
$5 goes to the Nicaragua
Thank you.
Sister City.
Thank you very much. And now that we're also doing thank yous, I also want to make a note to thank the Brookline Department of Public Health and the Friends of Brookline Public Health with Alan Balsa, Dr. Alan Balsa, Bruce Cohen, and many other great members. Thank you. I know time is short, so I'm going to be very quick. This woman is an amazing woman. She is born, bred, and raised in Brookline. And she's look at her. She's climbing up these stairs. I'm so sorry. With a broken foot and tendons and ligaments. I should come down to meet you. But the other shoe, oh my gosh. The other shoe is in a beautiful high heel. This woman was campaigning as a baby for Governor Dukakis. A baby. No, 17. She looks beautiful. She is an amazing, beautiful leader for Brookline. She has been here as a selectman, as the chair of the Board of Selectmen. She has been on the board of the Greater Boston Food Bank and everything else. And now I am very excited to say that she is our state treasurer. She is a leader for everything from paid family leave to pay equity. She is out there every day, literally working her feet off for us. So we want to give our very own amazing state treasurer, Deb Goldberg.
Thank you, Chris. So Chris will be the first to tell you that I'm not going out to everything right now because she was very important in an event last week for the Asian American community, and I have a long-standing relationship with the Asian American community, and unfortunately I was not able to make it. But there was no way that I was going to miss tonight because this is such an important part of our lives here in Brookline. And I want to acknowledge Gil Hoy, who sat on the board with me as a select person, and we together had a lot of fun doing things and getting people going and welcoming the delegation from Quezalguaque. Remember, Gil? We even got Rich Kelleher to have the mayor stay at his house. True story. And so every year I look forward to my email or phone call from Richard asking me for my annual support, but this year is particularly special. I look through this room and I think about how critical, and it's 28 years now that we've had this relationship, and it's extremely meaningful because I knew, I was living in Miami, working in Miami and commuting back here in the era when the dictator was in charge in Nicaragua. And so I was much closer to seeing a lot of this because so many of my friends were from South America. And I know what our country did and what they did down there and the work that all of you do and the trips. And so I'm so excited about the high school trip. I think that continuity of generation to generation of Brookline people and people in Quezalguaque, supporting them, building things, trying to figure out why the males there have this kind of kidney disease. We are making a difference, and in many ways I feel that we owe it to them. And so I think that the work all of you are doing is so incredibly critical, and I of course am thrilled to be here with one of the most significant people in my life, because in many ways, without my dad and Mike, I don't know that I'd be where I am today. So thank you for having me. I think this is a great event. Please, I know that there's an auction. Yes? No? I thought there was
Dancing with the Stars.
Oh.
Dancing with the Stars.
I've done it. Let me tell you what this guy is going through. He deserves every penny That you, in fact, I'm going home, I'm going online, I'm making you a contribution tonight. So, thank you for having me. Thanks to the committee, and lots of more to come.
She's amazing, and she was an amazing Dancing with the Stars star. So now we have our next one.
I did it with Chobi. Chobi. We did it together. And believe me, neither Chobi nor I will do it again.
So they will give to you, John. She's amazing, everyone. Deb Goldberg, our state treasurer.
I have to interrupt one more time. Alan did it too, and he injured himself. So, yep, you've got all of us here. We're all behind you, John.
Thank you. We will let the students come on down really quickly. Come on down. So I want to just quickly say while they're walking and to get Governor Dukakis over, we are so lucky to have our very own Governor Dukakis, who is here. He and Kitty are both here. They are Brookline through and through. He went to Baker. Kitty went to Runkle. They lived on Beaconsfield. They are amazing supporters of Brookline Sister City. He speaks in Spanish half the time. It's just phenomenal. So we are so lucky to have him be a part of this, and it's so near and dear to his heart. And then, come on, please. The other thing is something people don't really realize is, aside from being the amazing politician and leader and public policy maker, he is phenomenal with bargains. So feel free to ask him if you ever need to find a bargain for anything. You'll always see him at Costco. I literally run into him at Costco.
Well, that is true. But you can't be the son of Greek immigrants and not be frugal, folks. I have an apology to make to all of you. I really screwed up tonight. And this rarely happens. I've got a terrific student assistant who does all of my scheduling. But somehow we kind of disconnected. And it turns out I was scheduled for 2 events tonight. So regrettably, I'm not going to be able to introduce Stephen to all of you at the forum. And I'm sorry about that. But I do want to tell you a story. First, it's nice to be surrounded by my students. Chris was a student of mine. Stephen, you were not a student, but close. And I was a young state representative living on Perry Street, right around the corner from where we are. And one day, this junior at Brookline High School knocked on my door, introduced himself, said his name was Stephen Kinzer, and told me that he wanted to write an alternative newspaper to the traditional Brookline High School newspaper, which was called the Sagamore, wasn't it? Yes. But this would be a real newspaper. I mean, it would evaluate teachers, it would write editorials, all of those things. So the first thing he wanted was a contribution, which was fine, because he needed, what was it, $160 to publish the thing. And secondly, he asked for my intervention because the superintendent of schools at the time, Bob Sperber, a good friend of at least a few of us here, good friend of ours, had prohibited him from distributing the newspaper on high school property, and he wanted me to try to explain the First Amendment to Bob Sperber, which I did, and thereby made it possible for Steve not only to publish his newspaper, but to distribute it. And he's kind of been attached to the hip to Kitty and me ever since. Campaigned for me in 1970, some of you recall, I ran for lieutenant governor for the first time, and in 1969 we decided to get the name out there. So we had bumper stickers that said, Dukakis 70. That's all they said. And in those days, people still pumped your gas. And Steve was driving around campaigning from the western part of the state, and he pulled into a gas station to fill up his tank, and the guy said, Dukakis? He said, what's a Dukakis? Steve said, it's a rare bird, there are only 70 of them left. Anyway, worked for me for a year, my first term as governor, and then decided he wanted to do journalism professionally, became the Latin American correspondent for the Boston Globe, and subsequently the New York Times correspondent in Managua for 6 years, and really was the reporter of record during all of that conflict down there. And wrote a book, if you haven't read it, you should, called Blood of Brothers. Went on to become New York Times correspondent in Berlin, where he met a lovely woman who was his German tutor and married her. A wonderful person, an artist, Marianne, and subsequently became the New York Times correspondent in Istanbul, where he spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And if you don't read his column in the Boston Globe, you should. It's a remarkable and somewhat contrasting view of the world from some of the stuff that we're getting from Washington these days and from other parts of the world. So we feel terrible about the fact we're not going to be here to listen to him, but you are, and you're in for a real treat. And I hope our policymakers in Washington are listening to this guy and reading his stuff, because folks, we are largely responsible for an absolute humanitarian catastrophe in Syria. 11 million displaced people. 200,000 of them showing up on my dad's home island, Lesbos, in rubber dinghies. Some of them at the risk of their lives to get out of that mess. There was a better way, there is a better way. I hope with Stephen's guidance and with his writing, we can get there, because what's going on these days is just unacceptable. Other than that, all I can say is that Kitty and I are great fans of this effort. I'm determined one of these days we're going to get down there. I've got to practice my Spanish. Tiene que practicar. No tengo la oportunidad de practicar. Mucho. So we gotta get down there. But you know, the secret to my Spanish, as I think some of you know, is that strange as it may sound, the Greek and Spanish accents are identical, even though the languages are different. Really interesting. El acento griego y el acento castellano son casi idénticos. Entonces para nosotros es muy fácil de aprender. Pretty good, eh? And it was my grandmother who was responsible for that. Whenever I heard speak to. Anyway, thank you for helping. Thank you for contributing. It's a great cause. I swear one of these days Kitty and I are going to get down there with some of you. And a special thank you to my protege, who's knocking on the door at 93 Perry Street, started all of this. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. They are so in demand and they came to us first. Thank you. So next, we're going to meet with the 5 BU students. Come on up. I saw y'all. So if there are people who are coming looking for the Charlotte, it's in that room to my left. So we had 5 BU School of Public Health and medical students. This is a very happening event. There's a lot of excitement going on. Okay, so these great BU School of Public Health and medical school students went to Quezalguaque, and so we're gonna give them a couple moments, because I know you guys are busy and I think you have to go to class. Something, talk about your experience there.
Okay. Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for having us. My name is Andrea Molina. I'm a second-year medical student at BU. My part and Joanna's part was to do the sexual education charlas at the high schools. Unfortunately, we didn't have as much time as we wanted there because the CKD research really took up most of our time. So Joanna right now is going to talk a little bit about what we did there.
Yeah. Hi, I actually don't go to BU, I'm sorry. I'm a Tufts Med student and School of Public Health. So we wanted to meet with the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade classes in various schools within Quezalguaque to try to get an idea of their ideas about sexual health, what they believed that was true, what they believed that was not true, it was a myth. So we designed different activities for the 5th and 6th grade and the 7th and 8th grade to try to go in there and make it fun to learn about sexual health and try to get a handle on what they understood. So we found that they were there were some things that they knew a lot about and some things that they really knew nothing about. So it was interesting to kind of play play games and make it fun to like work with us and learn about what they did and didn't know. We weren't able to return to the same classes that we went to at first, so we couldn't really get like a baseline comparison. But hopefully in the future we can use some of what we learned to educate more.
Another part of the sexual education idea was to let the students know that there are free condoms available at the health center. There's 3 health centers in Quezalguaque, and we also brought about 500 to donate to the health centers, 500 condoms. And so it was said to me by a physician there that having them donated to them is much easier to give out versus when they're donated from the pharmacies there. They have to like individually like note that they donated or they gave away a condom. And so I think for the future it'd be great to have a sustainable condom donation program to the health centers there.
Hi, my name is Gia. I'm just going to talk about what the other part of our being in Quezalguaque was for. We were also involved in the CKD study, so chronic kidney disease, in association with BU. So we went in there to do a follow-up study. The study was done in 2008 to identify. Can you hear? Good? Sorry. Just to identify, so in 2008, a study was done by BU to identify cases in control, so just cases of CKD in the Quezalguaque area, and we returned to do another study to follow up. Mireille is going to tell you about that.
Hello, good evening. My name is Mireille Levy, second year SPH student at BU. So basically, I'm just going to go over the day-to-day activities that we did to conduct the study. I can say that every day was a learning experience for us, and also for beginning, middle, and end. There was a lot of it was an iterative process for us in terms of reaching certain individuals and communities within the municipal of Quezalguaque. So basically our day started at 8 a.m. and the whole group met at the Centro de Salud in Quezalguaque, and from there that's when we would depart to whatever our assigned comarca for the day. A comarca is like a small neighborhood, basically within the greater municipal area. And every day we would visit one. They varied in size, so it would largely depend, our strategy would depend on the size of the comarca. But we started from comarcas that are closest to the health center and then spread out further in radius. And we usually would target like small schools or clinics, and we would station there throughout the day. We would conduct interviews, follow-up participants, and we would also take blood, saliva, and urine samples from them. We had recruited 2 local phlebotomists to work with us as well, and they were almost like our key informants in our study, meaning that they spent a lot of time helping us or assisting us with finding our follow-up participants, because I think the largest barrier was that we didn't have addresses for these people. So we depended largely on the community, on community leaders, on Angelica, who was the director of the clinic that we were working with. So yeah, we spent the entire day out in the field. Sometimes we would split up in groups depending on how many people visited our site. So sometimes we would visit people's homes, or we would just stay at the school clinic and wait for people to show up, basically. And then at the end of the day, we would return to the lab, do some processing, and then make sure that everything is organized for the following day. And that would be a typical day in Quezalguaque for us. So I'm just going to pass it over to Aisha.
Hello, my name is Aisha. I'm a School of Public Health and a Master's of Science candidate at BU. For most of us, we all traveled internationally before, but never to Nicaragua. And this is our first time, I think, for most of us doing public health field work. So that was a huge learning experience for all of us logistically. Like, how do you reach a community that some parts don't have roads, don't have addresses, that they work during the day? So a lot of really hands-on skill set that we learned to target the most underrepresented population, I would say, in this part of the world. And then how do we communicate such a serious disease as chronic kidney disease to people who are affected or who have family members who are affected? And then as we were interviewing, it's so it was so great because we interviewed a lot of older people who would start telling us about their recipes that they'd make for the food, and I found myself in like half-hour conversations, not talking about chronic kidney disease, but just talking about life, and so my Spanish also improved. Those are, I think, our major learning skills that we acquired this summer, and it was a really great experience.
Thank you very much. So, hearing the students speak about a day in the life for them in Quezalguaque really does epitomize what this Sister City project is about. And so if you all look at the back of this beautiful program that your celebration committee put together, I think it was Carol, it says the Brookline-Quezalguaque Sister City program represents the very best of people in 2 communities in the world, learning about each other and believing that with generosity and resolve, good things are possible. And I definitely think that's true, and just heard it now with our students. So it was a great exchange of information, and it's wonderful to see that all good things are possible. So we are going to be soon kind of closing this portion down, and we're gonna let you enjoy some more delicious vine-ripe goodies and coffee. And then we'll ask you to transition in to the gymnasium to hear our very own BHS alum, Stephen Kinsner, who Governor Dukakis spoke so eloquently about. But before we do this, I want to say thank you again to our delicious food from Vine Ripe, to the amazing celebration committee, to State Treasurer Deb Colbert, Governor Dukakis. I didn't know that Gail, you and Deb were part of the creation of this, and Chili Hoy, and there's so many people in the room, so everyone can probably turn around and say thank you to the person next to them, and they were a part of it. But enjoy this. And then also, again, to thank the Brookline Health Department, the Diversity Office, the Interfaith Community, Valid Ambulance, and the Brookline Adult Education, who are all sponsors of our next upcoming program, the public forum, that will be right in the other room. So, take a break, have a cookie, and then take a few steps over, and let's continue this. Okay? So I'll see you soon. Thanks. So welcome to our 28th celebration fundraiser for Brookline Sister City. 28 years. It's amazing. There are many, many people in the room to thank. There is the celebration committee. There is, I just learned that Gil Hoy and State Treasurer Deb Goldberg were here to start this. Thank you. There are so many people, everyone, and we already did all the thank yous, but I just can't thank you enough because this has been a great partnership and relationship with Quezalguaque. So I have to formally say thank you, obviously, to the co-sponsors of this program, which are the Brookline Department of Public Health, the Brookline Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, which I work in, also the Brookline Adult and Community Education, and the Brookline Interfaith Clergy Association. Without them, this could not be possible. Thank you. So I get to introduce John Dempsey, who will then introduce Stephen Kinzer. But before I do that, I want to say he is here not only as a much-loved former devotion principal, but he also writes that really awesome column in the Brookline tab that you always read about recycling and hazardous waste and everything else, which I think is really fun. Does everyone read that? Yes, thank you. What you don't, or you might not know, is he is also being a Brookline Dancing with the Stars dancer to support Brookline Sister City. He's doing this. I asked him if he would do a little dance for us now, but he said he didn't want to do that because he doesn't want to give away all the tricks right now. And you know what? That's because you've got to put your money down and come and see him on Saturday, November 7th, where I hope I'm going to see you all there, right? So the word is, there might be some tearaway clothes, there could be a lift, or a throw, I'm not really sure. But I think some of those things could happen, maybe fireworks, I don't know. But you'll have to go, and you'll have to donate to Brookline Sister City, right? Okay, so without further ado, perhaps he will do a little dance up to the stage, is our very own John Dempsey. Thank you.
dancing tonight. I want to keep up the anticipation, build the anticipation. Thank you very much. I was just handed a script. Many of you heard Governor Dukakis, his comments about Stephen Kinzer, but I have comments to add, thanks to Richard Segan. Stephen Kinzer spent more than 20 years working for the New York Times, reporting from 50 countries. He was the Times bureau chief in Nicaragua, in Berlin, and Istanbul. And since leaving the Times, he has taught at Northwestern University and Boston University, and now he is at the Watson Institute down at Brown University. He's written books about Central America, Rwanda, Turkey, and Iran. Now, it doesn't say in the script whether he went to those places before all the trouble started or all the trouble started after he left, but he's written those books. He contributes to the New York Review of Books, and many of you have seen his World Affairs column in the Globe, most recently the one on the United Nations. And I particularly love the one about European infrastructure. We just came back from Europe. You nailed it. Last spring, he took a group of Brown University students to Nicaragua, and they did their work in Leon, which is about a half an hour from Quezalguaque. So that was just, I think that was random. I'm not sure if it was planned or not. Last month, he was invited by the Obama administration to Washington, D.C. to brief the new ambassador from the United States to Nicaragua, Laura Farnsworth Dogood. So, please join me in welcoming Stephen Kinzer.
I don't think Dancing with the Stars is in my future. It's not in my stars. What a wonderful opportunity to be here with you tonight. I'm so grateful for this. You know, Nicaragua is an acquired taste. It's a small country, but there are those who love it. I think many of us have had a chance to connect with Nicaragua, fallen under its spell. As you heard, I've worked in many countries in the world, and I think I really can say I loved them all. I loved Uzbekistan, I loved Lithuania, I loved Peru, but Nicaragua means something special to me. I don't know whether it's because I spent such an intense time there, or because of the time in my life that it was, or maybe it was because it was Nicaragua, and that's what I like to believe. I think this country has a spirit and a message that it's never really been able to deliver to the world. I learned so much about life from the people I spent those years with in Nicaragua. One of the most profound impacts that Nicaragua had on me comes from the fact that Nicaragua is so poor, but its people are so positive. So this is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. I once suggested in a late-night conversation with Daniel Ortega that Nicaragua should change the motto, their national motto. Their motto should be, "Thank God for Haiti." He didn't laugh. He didn't get the joke. So Nicaragua is close to the top in everything that's bad and close to the bottom in everything that's good by human development standards. Nonetheless, the people of Nicaragua are so warm-hearted. They're so positive. They are making so much out of so little that the lesson I took from them is one that really has helped shape my life, and it's this. You'll never hear me complain about my problems. I've been living with people that had real problems getting through life, and they were so positive about it, despite the overwhelming problems they had. Understanding what their problems were and understanding what my problems are is why I never complain about my problems anymore. And that started from my years in Nicaragua. So I arrived in Nicaragua almost by accident. As you heard earlier, I went to Brookline High School. I staggered out of school without much more understanding of where I wanted to go in the world than anybody else does when they get out of high school. And I had this vague idea that I wanted to do something to do with writing. Thank God I have this writing ability because I don't have any other talent. I'm not entrepreneurial. I'm not technical. I can't run a business. I can't work in a group. If I didn't have this, I'd probably be selling pencils out on the street. But I knew I had to make something out of this because that was all I had. That's why I was involved in the Sagamore in high school. I was already pursuing the one ability that I had. So I decided after those years of reading the New York Times that being a foreign correspondent would be a great thing to do in life. It was in Mr. Wright's American History class at Brookline High School, and I used to get that New York Times for like 10 cents a day. And I remember staring at the bylines. So the bylines were printed in boldface and in capital letters. And underneath, they don't do this anymore. It was a sin when they took this away. It used to say in agate type, "Special to the New York Times." I loved that phrase. I used to stare at that. I can't believe it. One of the editors of the New York Times cut that out as a way to save space on the page. That was a bad mistake, because that's what really inspired me. I wanted to be special to the New York Times. And I wanted to be special to New York Times readers. So I went to work for Governor Dukakis for a while, as you heard, and then I decided I wanted to go off on my own. I wanted to become a foreign correspondent. So what do? You want to become a foreign correspondent? Well, the first thing I thought of is, where am I going to go? It's a big world. Anywhere outside the United States counts. At this time, it was in the 1970s, there were revolutions going on in the Portuguese colonies of Africa, in Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau. Somehow I got interested in these, and I decided that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to Africa, and I'm going to report on the revolutions against Portugal. And as I started to plan the trip seriously, I began to realize that this is not realistic. It's the other side of the world. You don't speak the language. Nobody cares about it. Those are huge countries. You have no idea what's going on. Maybe you ought to recalibrate and do something a little more realistic. So I did learn some Spanish at Brookline High School, and I spent a little bit of time traveling in Latin America. Central America seemed to me to fit the formula that I had in mind, and I still give to my students. When kids come to me and ask me, how do I start being a foreign correspondent? And I tell them, well, go out into the world and go somewhere. And they ask, where should I go? So my answer is, pick the Goldilocks country. The Goldilocks country means not so well known and so much in the news that all of the reporters are already there, but not so abandoned and unknown that nothing's happening. You've got to find a place where there's more happening than the press realizes. That's your sweet spot. And so I decided to go to Central America. I went to Nicaragua, among about 3 or 4 other countries, and was immediately struck by how different this place was from anywhere I'd ever been. My first experience there was coming in from the airport. I got into a taxi, and I said to the driver, so I don't have a place to stay. Can you take me to a place that's reasonably clean and not too expensive and somewhere near downtown? So he said to me, you want to be downtown? I said, yeah. Long silence. Then he looks in the rearview mirror and says, first trip to Nicaragua? How did you know? So he said, there's no downtown here. There is no city. There's no Managua. I said, I don't understand. Where did I just land? It says Managua on my ticket. And then he explained to me that, of course, there had been an earthquake and the city had been destroyed, so there's no downtown, but he knew a place where he could take me, and sure enough, it was a very nice little inn. But I got up the first morning and realized that I was in a kind of a wasteland. First of all, as many of you know, in Nicaragua, there are no street addresses. You have to orient yourself according to landmarks. So you have to have about 100 landmarks in your head to be able to get around Managua, and every Nicaraguan does. The problem is that most of these landmarks don't exist anymore. They're all landmarks from before the earthquake. So people like me that arrived after the earthquake have a very good idea of Nicaragua before the earthquake, because we know where the Coca-Cola used to be. You turn and go down to the road to where the military hospital used to be. You have to know these things. So my driver's address was turn into the dirt road by the Upoli sign, go to the end of the road and look for the house under the tallest tree. I got lost going there the first time, and I got out of the car and asked somebody how to find this house of this guy. I gave the guy's name, and she said, "Oh, sure, I know Guillermo." I said, "Well, where's his house?" He said, "Sabe dónde murió el perrito? You know where the little dog died?" No. How can you expect to live in Nicaragua if you don't know where the little dog died? I began to understand that Nicaraguans see the world differently from other people. Now, one of Nicaragua's overwhelming problems and great assets is its love of poetry. So Nicaraguans are all poets. And this is a wonderful thing on an individual basis, but it's really bad for a country. You don't want poets to run your country. You'd like to have an accountant or somebody more boring to run your country and have a lot of poets on the side, but they don't have any accountants. They only have poets. That's one of the reasons why Nicaragua's in this Macondo, Garcia Marquez world. They take poetry very seriously. They take it much more seriously than they take government, which is just something practical and off to the side for a small group of people. Poetry is something they embrace as part of their physical, national, spiritual character. El Divino Rubén Darío, arguably the greatest poet that ever wrote in Spanish, is the only Nicaraguan to have risen to the very top level of world culture. And ordinary Nicaraguans, including Nicaraguans who've never read a book, can quote at length from Rubén Darío. You can always make a Nicaraguan smile by tossing off a line from Rubén Darío. Yo soy aquel que ayer no más decía el verso azul y la prosa profana. Oh, everybody wants that. But my favorite one lately is Juventud, divino tesoro, ya te vas para no volver. Youth, divine treasure, gone so soon, never to return. I didn't get that line when I was in my 30s living in Nicaragua, but I sure get it now. So the poetic aspect of life is very powerful in Nicaragua. And I think it explains, to a certain degree, some of their underdevelopment, but it also explains why their soul is so much richer than you see in almost every other country I've ever been in. They look at the world in a poetic and positive way. They are not brought down by the reality of the daily challenges that they face. And this is something else that I learned from Nicaraguans, and I've tried to adopt for my own life. Now, you heard earlier a wonderful line about Nicaragua and the sister city idea, and it was, I think we owe it to them. Let me just talk for a couple of minutes. I don't want to go on too long because I want to hear from you and make this into a conversation, but let me just be sure that all of you recognize some of this history. There's no country in the world where the cycle of rebellion, repression, intervention, and more rebellion has gone on for so long, and it's so clearly traceable over more than 100 years. So just to summarize it, in the first decade of the 20th century, Nicaragua had its most formidable leader, Jose Santos Zelaya. So Zelaya was a modernizer. He wanted to break the power of the Catholic Church. He wanted to build roads and schools. He built hundreds of schools and ports. He wanted to transform Nicaragua from a feudal country run by a couple of families into a capitalist country. But Nicaraguan capitalism was a threat to American capitalism, as we saw it. Zelaya wanted to borrow money from different countries, not only the United States. He wanted to have relations with various countries. He didn't want to be under the American wing. As a result of that, the United States organized a plot in 1909, and Zelaya was overthrown. That was the end of the reformist era in Nicaragua. Now, about 3 years later, a rebellion emerged against the American-imposed regime in Nicaragua. Americans sent troops to Nicaragua to put down this rebellion. And the leader of that rebellion, Benjamin Zeledon, another great Nicaraguan hero, was killed in the Marine assault on his hillside near Masaya. Zeledon's body was brought back to his home village. People came to pay their respects. One who came was a barefoot little boy named Augusto Cesar Sandino. Sandino actually came to see the body of Zeledon, and he later wrote, "Seeing Zeledon's body gave me the key to understanding Yankee piracy." In the 1920s, as you know, Sandino then led a revolutionary movement. This brought a major Marine invasion that lasted for years. It was quite a harsh guerrilla war. The first strafing from the air in world history happened in Ocotal, Nicaragua, as the Americans were fighting against Sandino. They were never able to crush Sandino. They were never able to capture him. Finally, the Americans withdrew, defeated, essentially, unable to achieve their objective. And Sandino, who had always said that he was only fighting because Americans were invading the country. Once the Americans were gone, he'd be willing to negotiate with anyone and put down his weapons. So he did. In 1934, as the American Marines were leaving, Sandino gave up his weapons. He met with the president, Sacasa, and told him, "I'm now just a politician. I'm just going to have a political party. War is over." As the Americans were leaving, they told President Sacasa, "You're on your own now, but we're only asking for one thing. We demand one thing as a condition of our departure. And that is that the guy we have trained to be the leader of your new non-political, impartial force, the National Guard, this guy Somoza, we want him to be the commander now of your National Guard." So on that night, after Sandino signed his peace accord with President Sacasa, he was leaving the palace. He was stopped by General Somoza's men and assassinated. That was in 1934. It was 22 years later when, in the city of Leon, a young patriot assassinated President Somoza, who had seized power after being head of the National Guard. Soon after that, a revolutionary movement emerged. They wanted to call themselves at first the National Liberation Front, like the people in North Vietnam and all these other Marxist movements. But in order to be rooted in Nicaragua, they called themselves the Sandinista National Liberation Front. So that was the force against which the United States sent the Contras. It's an amazing chain. It goes from Zelaya over 100 years ago. He's overthrown by the United States. Then Zeledon rebels. He gets killed. Sandino sees his body. He rebels. He gets killed. Then the Sandinistas come to power. The Americans sent the Contras in to fight them. So you can see that the Nicaraguans have watched this cycle over many generations. We ignore it. They are very much aware of it. Now I want to talk just briefly about what's happened in Nicaragua since that time. So I was there, I covered 2 wars in Nicaragua. I covered the Sandinista War, when the Sandinistas overthrew Somoza. And then I covered the Contra War, when the Contras came in to try to overthrow the Sandinistas with the help of the United States. So I hated the Contra War. I was there to watch it. I think that's just a natural reaction. Nonetheless, it had a certain rationality if you bought into the Reagan-Jesse Helms view of the world. If you saw the world that way, supporting the Contras might make sense. I didn't see the world that way, but I understood the logic of supporting the Contras. But after the Sandinistas, after that war ended, and an election was held in 1990, and the Sandinistas were defeated, and Violeta Chamorro came in, the United States then imposed a policy which I never could understand, that I think completely undermined our own interests, even as we define them. So Violeta Chamorro came in with a lot of support from the United States. We provided very important help to make sure she got elected. She did get elected. The Sandinistas were defeated in an open election. It was everything we'd ever dreamed of. Now our challenge was, make sure Violeta succeeds. Make sure democracy works. Make sure Nicaraguans come away with this idea. It was an improvement. We got rid of the Sandinistas and we got democracy. But we didn't do that. In fact, we imposed what's called structural adjustment programs through the International Monetary Fund. This was called the Washington Consensus in those days. Everybody in Latin America was going to get behind the United States. So under the structural adjustment plan, budgets are getting out of hand. Budgets have to be cut. So what does that mean? First of all, people have to be fired from the government. So Violeta Chamorro had to fire over 100,000 government employees. All of those people had been middle-class citizens. They had houses. Some of them had cars. They were living fairly decent lives. Suddenly, they had nothing. No work, no job, no ability to support themselves. And that's a huge number of people. Besides that, structural adjustment says you can't have subsidized bus fares, you can't have subsidized gasoline prices, you can't subsidize the price of bread. Everybody should pay the real price. Cut all government subsidies. Well, that's what happened. This is what we made Violeta Chamorro do. As a result, Nicaragua's developed a very negative view of democracy. Democracy means everybody's out of work and the bus fares go up and you can't afford gasoline, you can't buy any food anymore. So this was a project that was deeply undermining to our own interests in Nicaragua. It shouldn't be surprising that not so long after that, Sandinistas came back to power and Daniel Ortega now ruling the country again. And I have plenty of criticisms of Ortega, and I think all of you who've been to Nicaragua probably would share some of those. Nonetheless, the Sandinistas have managed to persuade a number of poor people in Nicaragua, that's most Nicaraguans, that we care about you, and the other side doesn't care about you. And there's a lot of evidence for that, including what happened during Violeta Chamorro's time. So where are we now with Nicaragua? I think we're in a good position. I think the U.S.-Nicaragua relationship is in a good place, and it's going to improve. First of all, Daniel Ortega, the president of Nicaragua, has shed all of his leftist baggage, except in rhetoric. If you listen to him, he sounds like the same Daniel Ortega of the 1980s. He sounds like Fidel Castro. But if you ignore that, he's our friend and does everything we want. So he has invited the private sector organization, the business group, that was his principal opponent during the 1980s when I was there, not only to shape economic policy, but to come in, actually into the presidential palace and run the economy. That's why, for example, if you want to import shoes or school books in Nicaragua, you got to pay tax. If you want to import a luxury yacht, no taxes. That's because of who's running economic policy now. In terms of security policy, too, I think Nicaragua and the United States are cooperating. Many of you may know that Nicaragua has the lowest rates of violent crime of any country in Central America. It's even lower than Costa Rica. As countries like El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala have spiraled into this horrific violence, it hasn't happened in Nicaragua. And Americans have admired this. Americans are pleased that the drug penetration that's happened in other parts of Central America has not happened in the Nicaraguan government. So there's a little bit of a repeat of the arrangement we had in the Somoza years. And that was, United States will allow you to do whatever you want inside the country if you cooperate with us on security matters. So in those days it was fighting leftists and communists, as we called them. Now it's fighting drug traffickers on the Atlantic coast. Nonetheless, it's the same deal. Security for political support. Now, I think Nicaraguans have every basis to be negative and hostile and resentful towards Americans, but they're not. They're actually very open and welcoming. Many of you who've been there must have noticed this. So I want to close by talking just a little about the value of a kind of a program like the one we're all here tonight to support. We're all concerned about injustice in the world. And we're all bombarded with opportunities to make financial or other kinds of contributions to organizations. But I think many of us are skeptical and we wonder, does this support ever really get to anyone? Does it have a real recipient, or is it just going to support more fundraising operations? Sister City is a way to get around that. Sister City projects, and this one in particular, truly bring needed resources to real people. They cut through the bureaucracy and all the middle bureaucratic layers that suck up so much of what the world tries to do to help people in need. Person-to-person contact is so important. This project, your Sister City program, is building a bridge between a community in the United States and a community in Nicaragua. And it is changing lives on both ends of that bridge. So I tremendously admire the work that you're doing, and I encourage you to deepen it. This is the way that you can reach out to other people in other cultures in a positive way, in a way that really makes a difference in the lives of identifiable individuals. So, I'm thrilled to be able to be a part of this. I'm so happy to see the enthusiasm that Brookline has generated for this project. And I heard Governor Dukakis say that the time's got to come when he gets to Nicaragua. I want to go down with him and bring a lot of you along. Thanks so much. We have some time before we have to clear out the room, and I'd be happy to hear from any of you who want to make observations or maybe ask any questions about Nicaragua.
I find it interesting to note that the cycle of American intervention and repression in Nicaragua goes back further than where you started, obviously, because I found it interesting down in Quezalguaque the number of times I find myself having to apologize for Walker.
Well,
who was from Massachusetts?
Well, William Walker was the American adventurer who made himself president of Nicaragua in the middle of the 19th century. However, when I was, it was actually in the late 80s and early 90s, the United States had an ambassador in Honduras named William Walker. And I always wondered, how does he manage to walk around in Central America with that name? Walker is the place where it all started. But as you pointed out, it didn't stop there.
But it comes up in conversation in a small, mainly rural town in Nicaragua when you're sitting around at night talking about things. It still comes up. And so does the hard feelings about the Panama Canal.
Well, there aren't many countries where an American has shown up and led an army and declared himself president of the country. So I guess, in fact, we've had a lot of problems with that in the United States. Imagine how bad, it's bad enough for us to have the Americans that we've had as presidents. Imagine if we had to send some of them to other countries. So yeah, I think the Walker thing is still very much in the minds of Nicaraguans. Americans, of course, have never heard of him. Nonetheless, Nicaraguans have taken a lot from the United States. It's very positive, and I think they sense that too. You know, Nicaragua, for example, is the only country in Central America where people play baseball. In the rest of Central America, everybody plays soccer. They don't do that. In Nicaragua, they do it. It was actually because of Zelaya. Zelaya was a great modernizer. He brought baseball to Nicaragua in the early years, a little over 100 years ago. And he actually chose the names of all the teams, and it really gives you an insight into his psychology. So one of the teams he chose was Juventud, youth. And then he had another team with a name that I'd love to see, but I don't think it's going to make it in America as a baseball team. He had a team called The Insurgency. I don't think we're ready for that one yet. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about if you have any opinion on the canal that was attempted to be done by the Chinese entrepreneurs.
So the question was about the canal that's going to be built in Nicaragua, supposedly. Well, first of all, the canal project has mobilized quite a number of people in Nicaragua. There's a big opposition movement, but I don't think it's mobilized the entire country. I think the ordinary Nicaraguan really doesn't care, and they think it's going to bring a lot of jobs. Some indigenous communities will be dislocated, and some islands will be sunk. It's no big deal. I don't care. Needless to say, the people along the route don't feel that way, and there's been quite an active protest along the route. Nonetheless, I have to say, I'm going to go out on a limb. I don't take this project seriously. I don't think it's going to materialize. It's a hugely expensive project, and the Chinese entrepreneur who wants to build it is not worth nearly. He's in the billions, but this is in the tens, way into the tens of billions. So he can't afford to pay for it himself. That being the case, there are only two places you can get the money. So one would be in the private equity market. They would raise it from investors. But those investors are pretty careful when they want to give billions of dollars. They want to read all the studies. And studies either have not been made, or in the one case of the big study that the Chinese have made, it's not public. So nobody knows how many ships are going to come and where they would come from and how much they would pay, and what the environmental impacts would be. So I don't see the financial market open to this. And the only other place to get the money would be from the Chinese government. So if China were to decide that this was a strategic project for China, then money could come from there. But I don't see that happening either, in particular, looking at what's been happening in the Chinese financial markets recently. I can't imagine this project bubbling up to the top of China's priority. So I don't see this project happening. I can tell you that, as many of you know, the canal dream in Nicaragua goes back as long as there's been Nicaragua. In the end of the 19th century, the US Congress actually chartered an American company to start dredging at the mouth of the San Juan River on the Caribbean side. And it ran out of money after a few years, so that project was did not materialize. But when I read about that, I was living in Nicaragua, and I figured out the town, that's really in the middle of nowhere now, way on a silted gulf on the Caribbean side. Had the canal been built, it would have been like Cologne, a massive container port. But I decided, I'm going to go out there. It used to be called Greytown, now it's San Juan del Norte. So I said, you can't get there, you have to go on a boat, it's really complicated, a fantastic journey through all of this untouched tropical rainforest that would have all been destroyed had the canal been built. And when I got there, I could still see the remnants of the old draggers and machinery that this company had brought there from the United States in the 1890s. It's still half sunk under the water, and when low tide comes, you can see it out there. And just like that guy that carries the little Ruben Dario paperback in his back pocket, seeing the ruins of the old canal project from over 100 years ago really does give you a sense of Nicaragua's attempts to project itself onto the world stage and its failure to do so.
How big is the expat community in Nicaragua?
So how big is the expat community? Well, it's definitely growing. I've read recently for $2,000 a month you can live quite well in Nicaragua. That's attracting a lot of retirees. In fact, the phrase Nicaragua is the new Costa Rica is already a cliche. It has been in so many magazines and newspapers. I think Nicaragua really is a real appealing place for retirees. There's a big expat community. A lot of it is based on the two places where the tourists are centered. So one is in Granada, right on the lake, the beautiful old colonial city. And the other is around San Juan del Sur on the Pacific coast. That's where you can now buy American books. In the bookstore, you can buy brownies and chocolate chip cookies. I don't know if you can still buy a nacatamal. I was looking for one outside. I guess you don't get them here. But the expat community is definitely growing, and I can see why. It's inexpensive. People are wonderful. And I even see growth there, and I think some of the Nicaraguans are seeing this too. Build a community, a big gay community with a hospital and a golf course and a lot of wonderful Nicaraguan people who take care of you. That's very appealing to Americans. So I think the expat community is growing and will continue to do so until, like Costa Rica, it kind of prices itself out of the market. But that hasn't happened yet.
Thanks, Steve, for this great talk. I was one of the first ones to sign up for that tour you just offered. This city group, and I'll bet a lot of other people do too.
I'm ready.
Can you explain how Nicaragua has managed to escape the drug trade? I mean, it is really...
So how did Nicaragua manage to escape the drug trade? Let me expand the question and talk about how Nicaragua managed to escape the violent crime that's afflicted that whole region, a lot of which is drug-driven. So in the northern tier of Central America, Guatemala, Honduras particularly, drug gangs have completely infiltrated the government. There are whole regions of the country, particularly in Guatemala, where the police can't go because those are drug transshipment points. That hasn't happened in Nicaragua. And I think there are a couple of reasons for it. One is that Nicaraguan leaders have not been as corrupt as leaders in some other countries have had a lot of other failures. But certainly the last few, the last couple, not that one. Also, I think there's so much opportunity for them in the other countries that they really don't need Nicaragua. So Guatemala is so open to them, and Honduras is so open to them. Nicaragua has been patrolling its coast fairly aggressively, but I think there's another reason. A lot of these drug gangs are also connected to revolutionary groups, particularly the Colombians. So in Colombia, the rebel group, the FARC, is intimately connected with drug gangs. Those rebels also consider themselves leftists. And they have a sort of sympathy for Nicaragua, as Nicaragua proclaims itself leftist and friendly with like Evo Morales, and they like Hugo Chavez and those people. So I think that might also be a reason. But I'm going to tell you something else that happened in Nicaragua that I think is a positive legacy of the Sandinistas. A lot of what they did in the 1980s was devastating for Nicaragua, but not everything. Before the Sandinistas came in, Nicaragua was essentially under the rule of the National Guard. So this was one of the 5 countries in Latin America where the United States created a constabulary. And in all of those cases, it was destroyed. In several cases, it was destroyed by the United States. We did that in the Dominican Republic, we did that in Panama. So the National Guard of Nicaragua was the police and the army. They were the thugs. They were the guys that would beat you up in the police station. When the Sandinistas came in, those guys were all gone. There wasn't anyone left. So they started from scratch. And they built a new police force, and they did it very differently. They hired teenage kids from Quezalguaque and just told them, stay at home and patrol your neighborhood. You know everyone in the neighborhood. Keep in touch with them, and make sure that people don't get pushed into crime. So they don't have the phrase community policing, but it's something like that. The cops in Nicaragua are not outsiders. They live in communities, and they're from that community. Actually, with the National Guard, they did the opposite. They didn't even want them to be posted in communities that they were from. Otherwise, they'd be favorable to one side or another. So they put them in places where they didn't know anybody, and they would be brutal to everybody. But the Sandinista police has remained in place since the 1980s, and I think its radically different approach to policing has produced a tremendously peaceful society. There's violence in the home. There's domestic violence. It's very high in Nicaragua. A lot of it is alcohol fueled. But rates of murder, street crime, and other kinds of violent crime in public are very low. And I attribute this in large measure to the connection that people feel to their own police forces.
Besides what you mentioned, the relationship with the United States and Nicaragua, you do your own thing and cooperate with the spirit. Are there other policies that would, towards Nicaragua, that would make sense for this?
You know,
repeat the question.
So the question was, are there any other policies that the United States could follow toward Nicaragua that would increase the strength and the warmth of our relationship? First of all, you know, there's a huge disconnect. On the one hand, Nicaragua needs everything. Nicaragua is in need of all kinds of development. On the other hand, first of all, the United States has not proven very skillful at delivering this kind of aid. And for the United States to come to Nicaragua and say, hey, we've got a lot of great presents for you, is really, on the basis of history, not something that Nicaraguans are quite ready to hear. I would like to see the United States encourage more trade and tourism to Nicaragua. The United States is already the #1 trading partner for Nicaragua. I think, although Ortega was against the DR-CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, Nicaragua has tremendously benefited from it. Nicaragua is doing fairly well economically now. The prices for Nicaraguan exports are high for beef and for metals and other things that Nicaragua exports, sugar. I'm going to single out one program or one project that was mentioned by the very interesting group of BU students who spoke a little bit earlier, and that is the kidney disease problem. You know, they were very modest, but BU played a very important role. BU did a study on this problem about 5 years ago, and couldn't find any roots for it, and the people that run the big sugar plantations and everything were very happy. They loved BU, but BU didn't give up. Last year they issued another, or this year they issued another report, and they said, wait a minute, we figured it out. It's the big sugar growers. It's the Pelos family. It's the guys that own all those sugar plantations around Leon, and the chemicals that they're using, it's their fault. Immediately, Nicaragua didn't like BU anymore. And the guy who's the head of the organization that's trying to work with Nicaraguans to combat this has been banned from entering Nicaragua. This is a real deep health problem. It's focused in Nicaragua, although it has manifestations in other parts of Central America. I'd love to see the United States get involved in that project. That's a health project, but Nicaraguan government is not able to get involved or doesn't want to because it involves offending essentially the most powerful economic family in the country. If the United States could find a way that would not seem alienating to the Nicaraguan government, to begin becoming involved in at least treating people, if not being able to treat the sources, I think that would be a great project. We need to reach out to Nicaragua in ways that are seen as positive, not ways that have like a negative side to them. I think this is what so many people in Latin America think of when they see the United States. Okay, you're coming down here, you're offering something that sounds good, but what's the catch? They have 100 or more than 100 years of experience with this. I give you one example. This happened in Cuba. It happened a couple of years ago, but now the news has just come out. Some of you may have seen this a few months ago. This was an AID project. So Congress has required AID, our foreign aid agency, to spend a certain amount of money in Cuba to create trouble in Cuba. What do they call it? Promote democracy in Cuba. So it's the same thing. So the AID came up with this plan. Let's try to fight against HIV/AIDS in Cuba. So what we'll do is we'll put out the word that we're going to have an AIDS project, and anybody that wants to work on it, help your community and fight AIDS, come in and join us. But actually we find out from the memo that the real point was to identify activists in Cuba, people that are eager to do things. And once you bring them in, you start talking about AIDS, and pretty soon you begin to talk to people, you find out some of them may not like the government, and this will be a project, the real purpose of which is to identify people who can later become anti-Castro activists inside Cuba. So people all over Latin America read that story with great attention. It didn't make any blip on our radar screen. But that's the way people in Latin America look at the United States, and unfortunately, we've given them plenty of evidence to believe that. So I think the job in Nicaragua is not to come down with the idea we can save you. They've been saved enough by us, and they've suffered a great deal from our saving. I think our goal should be to make clear to Nicaraguans that we've transcended the political disputes among Nicaraguans, and we don't want to get involved in them anymore. We're not picking sides anymore. We only want to do things that are going to help Nicaraguan people, and these will continue regardless of who's in power at the time.
Thank you. Do you see a way to engage Nicaragua, let's say from the U.S. perspective, or really from a global perspective, in terms of Nicaragua has a very young population, has a potentially huge workforce, and I think that sort of used in the context of a country that's not fraught with, violence that we talked about, creates a situation where, potentially there could be a great deal of opportunity.
So the question was about the youth of Nicaragua. It's a very young country. Doesn't that provide the basis for many new opportunities? In some ways it does. Unfortunately, the Nicaraguan education system is terrible. The Nicaraguan education system is not preparing these kids. The new generation of Nicaraguans is not prepared to compete in the global marketplace. And that's dragging Nicaragua down. Their education system is poorly funded. You've got a lot of half-educated 16-year-olds in the classroom trying to teach 12-year-olds. Many of you that have been there have seen this. This goes back to the previous question. What could the United States do? These are the kinds of programs that are not political. If the United States can get involved in promoting education in Nicaragua, that would really be a motive to pull that country up. And let me go back to something I said earlier. So that's a great generalized comment. Okay, Americans should help Nicaraguans become more educated, but that's so diffuse. How do you focus it down? Well, the project that we're here tonight to support is one way to do that. This project is also working with the schools in the community that's our sister city, Quezalguaque. So here is a way to be educating a real, small but real number of people, as opposed to projects that are supposed to educate all of Nicaraguans, but you never know whether it ever gets down to one person. Education might be the #1 challenge for Nicaragua. How does Nicaragua break out of underdevelopment and break into the world economy? That is the only route, and that avenue is really not open for ordinary Nicaraguans because education is so poor there. That's another reason why projects like this one are so important. I hate the utopian visionary view of the world. Everything's going to get better, there won't be any diseases, we're going to help everyone get educated. That is too diffuse for me. Here is a project that is on a real human scale. This is how you build change in the world. You don't build it by utopian and visionary projects. You build it one brick at a time. It's frustrating because it's only happening in one town and it takes so long. On the other hand, you can get to see changes. And in 28 years, we've seen a lot of changes in this one community. So, to me, this kind of direct contact, people to people, is the building block for a long-term project. And I think any project aimed at developing a country like Nicaragua has to be long-term, and we cannot expect quick results, which is something very American. Americans always want quick results. Let's try to abandon that and try to do our little bit to promote a project that over the long run can produce the result that we all wish for.
Is Cuba sending in any doctors into Nicaragua?
So is Cuba sending doctors to Nicaragua?
This country?
Actually, they are. Cuba is still sending doctors to Nicaragua. They're doing this in other countries as well. And let me tell you, those Cuban doctors go places where no doctors go. I mean, they are not living in a nice town and they have a nice white shirt and a stethoscope around their neck. They are living in deep Nicaragua where people really have no health care. So the Cubans have done a great job down there. And needless to say, that has provoked a great amount of sympathy from ordinary people. Well, okay, I'm going to take, okay, go ahead.
For like 2 more.
Okay, go ahead.
After the volcano, didn't you enlist trying to keep the Cuban doctors from going to help?
Yes, it's true. The Americans did not like the idea of Cubans going there. And we always feel that the Cuban doctors are some kind of a spear point for communist influence. And I think the Nicaraguan answer was perfect. They said, sure, send us 150 American doctors who want to go out and live in the jungle where there's no food or where you get sick all the time. We'll be happy to send the Cubans home. Just show us the 150 Americans. And they didn't show up because they're not participating in wonderful projects like this one. All right, there's one more. Go ahead.
Ay, Nicaragua, Nicaraguita, la flor más linda de mi querer, adorada con la bendita Nicaragüita, sangre de mi ángel. Ay, Nicaragua, sos más dulcita que la mielita de Tamagas. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más.
That wasn't planned. Thank you so much.
So I just have a couple little things to say. So the first thing is, Thank you so much. Thank you. You can see him afterwards to set up your tour of Nicaragua with him. So just a couple things, oblige me 3 minutes. So, we want to keep the celebration going, and you can wake up tomorrow morning with your very own cup of some Nicaraguan coffee. $15 for the pound, that's such a bargain when you know that $5 goes directly to Brookline Sister City. So my hope is that when I leave tonight, they're all gone, right? So we're all gonna buy those. The next thing is, you look at this beautiful, beautiful booklet that has been put together by the amazing celebration committee. You'll see that the chair is Chobi Boy. So I want to make sure everyone says thank you to her, because she chairs this. Thank you. And she, time and again, takes out full-page ads in the Brookline tab, sponsoring all of the Sister City events. That is huge. Thank you. And it lists all the amazing people who have served as sponsors. And a lot of those amazing people have the really fancy name tags, if you want to see them. So you can say thank you to them personally. I just have 2 more. I'm almost done. John Dempsey. I hope he didn't get hurt on that stumble onto our stage. But this was really fun. And you can do this again with food and dancing, all with your friends together by buying a table or a seat, and maybe with all of the nice people that you're sitting next to, we can keep this going. So hopefully I'll see you all in 2 weeks, right? So don't forget to get your flyer on the way out. I'm almost done, right? The second to last thing. The Sister City Week's not over. It goes until October 24th. There are, because this celebration committee worked hard, got 6 restaurants in Brookline. The Abbey, El Centro, the Fireplace, the Golden Temple, La Mora, and the Middle Grand. They have a Sister City cocktail. You go and you get a drink and you say, we're doing good while we're having a good time. And the proceeds go to benefit Brookline Sister City. So keep it going and thank these restaurants. And you know what would be really great? Is you go visit all 6 of them. Kind of think of it as like this Sister City pub crawl. Okay? Same night, and you make sure to bring all your friends. So think about it. It's still going on. Last but not least, thank you to each and every one of you for coming and spending your evening. It's been a great night. I think Stephen was like kind of a one-man Nicaragua show, so that was great. So thank you again. Thank you to each of you. Thank you to Big for taping this, and to the Brookline Teen Center for letting us be in their space. Enjoy. Have a good night.